October 12, 1968, 3:47 a.m. Jean-Claude Moreau stood on the roof of a Harlem tenement building, watching $32 million worth of pure heroin burn in the street below. The white powder scattered like snow in the October wind, mixing with ash from the 3 cars that had been transporting it through the neighborhood. For 18 months, the French Connection had been moving Turkish heroin through Harlem on its way to distribution points throughout America. The route was perfect, a predominantly black neighborhood where white federal agents stood out like searchlights, where local residents minded their own business, where the NYPD had minimal presence. Tonight, that route was permanently closed. By dawn, Jean-Claude Moreau and 7 other French Connection operatives would be dead. Their bodies would be found scattered throughout Manhattan, each one killed in a different method, each death sending a clear message to international drug traffickers. Harlem was not a highway for poison. Bumpy Johnson had declared war on the French Connection, and like every war Bumpy fought, it would end with the complete destruction of his enemies. To understand how Bumpy Johnson destroyed the most sophisticated international drug pipeline in history, you need to understand what the French Connection represented in 1968. It wasn't just a drug operation. It was a billion-dollar international conspiracy that moved Turkish opium through French laboratories to American streets. The operation was controlled by Auguste Ricord in Paraguay, coordinated by Michel Victor Mertz in France, and distributed through Corsican crime families in Marseille. The heroin they produced was 95% pure, far stronger than anything available in America. More importantly, it was flooding into Harlem at a rate that threatened to destroy the community. Bumpy Johnson had spent 30 years protecting. June 15, 1967, 15 months before Bumpy's war against the French Connection, Detective Raymond Murphy contacted Bumpy with information that would change everything. "Bumpy, we got a major problem. The French are using Harlem as a distribution point for heroin coming out of Marseille. They met at Marcus Garvey Park at midnight, away from listening ears and watching eyes." "What kind of distribution?" Murphy handed Bumpy a manila folder. "Everything we know about what they're calling the French Connection. Turkish opium, processed in French laboratories, shipped to New York through diplomatic pouches, then moved through Harlem to dealers nationwide." Bumpy studied the intelligence for 20 minutes. What he read horrified him. "Ray, they're moving how much heroin through Harlem? Conservative estimate, 200 kilos a month. Street value around $32 million. And where's it going? Everywhere. Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, Washington. They're using Harlem as the distribution hub for the entire East Coast." That night, Bumpy made a decision that would put him in direct conflict with international organized crime for the first time in his career. The French Connection would be driven out of Harlem, permanently and violently. But first, he needed to understand exactly how the operation worked. July 1st, 1967. Bumpy initiated the most comprehensive intelligence operation of his career. Through his network of service workers, taxi drivers, and street-level informants, he began mapping the French Connection's Harlem operations. What he discovered was more sophisticated than anything he'd encountered in 30 years of criminal activity. The heroin arrived in New York through diplomatic pouches shipped to the French consulate. From there, it was transported to a network of safe houses throughout Manhattan, with the primary storage facility located in Harlem at 142nd Street and Lenox Avenue. The building was a legitimate business, Rousseau Imports, specializing in French wines and gourmet foods. But the basement contained the largest heroin processing laboratory on the East Coast, capable of cutting and packaging 200 kilos of pure heroin per month. More disturbing to Bumpy was the recruitment network the French had established in Harlem. Young black men, desperate for money and opportunity, were being recruited as street-level dealers and transport workers. They were paid well, protected from local law enforcement, and gradually addicted to the product they were selling. August 15, 1967. Bumpy confirmed what he'd suspected. The French Connection wasn't just using Harlem as a distribution point. They were systematically destroying the community from within by creating an army of addicted dealers who would recruit new users and expand the market. The operation was brilliant, profitable, and utterly devastating to the neighborhood Bumpy had spent his life protecting. September 1st, 1967. Bumpy began Phase 1 of his war against the French Connection. Intelligence gathering. He needed to identify every person involved in the operation, from street-level dealers to international coordinators. Over the next 6 months, Bumpy's network compiled detailed intelligence on 73 people involved in the French Connection's Harlem operations. More importantly, they identified the 3 key figures coordinating the entire East Coast distribution network. Jean-Claude Moreau was the operational supervisor, responsible for coordinating shipments and managing the processing laboratory. Philippe Dubois handled recruitment and street-level distribution. Marcel Fontaine managed security and dealt with law enforcement interference. Each man was a professional criminal with international connections. Each man believed that Harlem was territory they could exploit without consequence. They were about to learn why that assumption was fatal. March 15, 1968, Bumpy received intelligence that the French Connection was planning to expand their operations. Instead of processing 200 kilos per month, they intended to increase capacity to 500 kilos per month, making Harlem the primary heroin distribution center for the entire United States. The expansion would require recruiting an additional 200 street-level dealers, establishing new safe houses throughout the neighborhood, and increasing the flow of heroin through the community by 250%. Bumpy realized that if the expansion succeeded, Harlem would be irreversibly damaged. The community would become so dependent on drug money that legitimate businesses would be driven out, families would be destroyed, and the neighborhood would become a narcotics colony controlled by foreign criminals. March 20th, 1968. Bumpy made his decision. The French Connection would be eliminated completely, not driven away, not discouraged, not negotiated with, eliminated. April 1st, 1968. Bumpy began Phase 2, recruitment of specialized personnel. The war against the French Connection would require capabilities that his regular associates didn't possess. He needed people with military training, international experience, and the ability to operate against sophisticated criminal organizations. Through contacts dating back to World War II, Bumpy recruited a team of 8 men who had served in military intelligence units. These weren't street criminals or local enforcers. They were professionals who understood surveillance, infiltration, and elimination techniques. May 15, 1968. The team was in place and operational. Their mission was simple: identify, infiltrate, and eliminate every aspect of the French Connection's Harlem operations. June 1st, 1968. Phase 3 began. Systematic infiltration. Bumpy's team established surveillance on every known French Connection facility, safe house, and meeting location. They documented delivery schedules, security procedures, and personnel movements. More importantly, they began recruiting sources within the French operation. Street-level dealers, recruited by the French but loyal to Harlem, began providing intelligence about upcoming shipments, security changes, and operational plans. August 10, 1968. Bumpy received the intelligence he'd been waiting for. The French Connection was planning their largest single shipment in the operation's history. On October 12, 1968, 150 kilos of pure heroin, worth $47 million on the street, would arrive in Harlem for processing and distribution. The shipment would be coordinated personally by Jean-Claude Moreau, Philippe Dubois, and Marcel Fontaine. All 3 key figures would be in Harlem simultaneously, along with their security teams and transportation coordinators. October 12th would be the day Bumpy Johnson ended the French Connection forever. October 10th, 1968. 2 days before the scheduled shipment, Bumpy held his final planning meeting with his 8-man team. The operation would be coordinated across 7 locations simultaneously, ensuring that no part of the French network could escape or warn the others. The plan was methodical and final. Eliminate every person involved in the French Connection's Harlem operations, destroy all heroin shipments, and send a message that would prevent any other international drug organization from considering Harlem as an operational base. October 12, 1968, 3:30 a.m. The French Connection's largest shipment arrived in Harlem as scheduled. Jean-Claude Moreau supervised the unloading at 3 separate locations: the Rousseau Imports Building, a warehouse on 145th Street, and a legitimate furniture store that served as a front. 3:47 a.m. Bumpy Johnson's war against the French Connection began. At the Rousseau Imports Building, Philippe Dubois and 4 associates were processing heroin when the basement laboratory exploded. The blast, caused by igniting the chemical solvents used in heroin processing, killed all 5 men instantly and destroyed 50 kilos of pure heroin. At the 145th Street warehouse, Marcel Fontaine and his security team were inventorying the shipment when the building caught fire. The fire started simultaneously on 3 floors, trapped the 8 men inside. Their bodies were found after the fire was extinguished 6 hours later. At the furniture store, Jean-Claude Moreau was coordinating distribution. When he realized his operation was under systematic attack, he attempted to escape through the rear exit, but found Bumpy Johnson waiting for him in the alley. The conversation lasted exactly 3 minutes. Moreau offered money, threatened international retaliation, and finally begged for his life. Bumpy's response was simple: "You made Harlem sick. Now Harlem's making you dead." Jean-Claude Moreau was shot 6 times with a .45 caliber pistol. His body was left in the alley with a note pinned to his chest: "The road is closed." 3:52 a.m., 5 minutes after the operation began, the French Connection's entire Harlem network was destroyed. 18 men were dead, 3 facilities were destroyed, and 150 kilos of heroin had been eliminated. But Bumpy Johnson wasn't finished. October 13th, the day after the Harlem operation, the war expanded to Manhattan. French Connection facilities in Little Italy, the financial district, and the Upper East Side were systematically destroyed. Another 12 operatives were killed, and an additional 75 kilos of heroin were destroyed. October 15th, the French Connection attempted to re-establish operations using backup facilities in Brooklyn and Queens. Both locations were attacked within hours of becoming operational. 7 more operatives were killed, and the last of the organization's East Coast heroin supply was destroyed. October 20th, 1 week after the war began, the French Connection sent a message through intermediaries. They were withdrawing all operations from New York and would not attempt to re-establish them. The message was too late. Bumpy Johnson's response was delivered to the Fren.